What if I told you that in the final hours of Marilyn Monroe's life, she made a phone call so unexpected, so emotionally raw, that the person on the other end kept her voice saved on tape for the rest of their life? Not because Marilyn said something scandalous, not because she revealed Hollywood secrets, but because in that last recorded breath, she spoke a truth so human, so stripped of the glamour the world forced on her, that it would forever change how the world understood the woman behind the myth. It wasn't a call to a lover, or a studio head, or a doctor. It was to someone she had not spoken to in years, someone who once hated her, someone whose life she had changed without ever knowing. And the words she spoke in that call left the world speechless. If this story moves you, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment about a time when someone's unexpected honesty changed the way you saw them. Your story might help someone else see past the surface today. August 4th, 1962. The clock in Marilyn Monroe's Brentwood home read 7:42 p.m. The sun had dipped behind the California hills, leaving the rooms washed in soft amber light that made everything look dreamlike, almost unreal. The newspapers had spent the whole summer tearing her apart. Stories about being difficult, about mental breakdowns, about failed marriages, about friendships falling apart. She had been fighting to reclaim control of her image, to return to work, to prove she was still the brightest star in Hollywood's sky. But beneath all of that, beneath the diamonds and perfume and carefully rehearsed smiles, something deeper had been unraveling for years. In a small apartment less than 30 minutes away sat Eleanor Kane, a 50-year-old columnist who had spent most of the 1950s attacking Marilyn in her nationally syndicated gossip column. Eleanor had been known for her sharp tongue and cold precision, cutting actresses down with a few elegantly chosen lines that could destroy careers overnight. She had called Marilyn everything from a walking publicity stunt to the perfect example of beauty without depth. She had mocked Marilyn's voice, her acting, her insecurities, her marriages, anything she could find that would sell papers. And it worked. Eleanor had become famous for taming Hollywood's untouchables. But the public never knew the real reason behind her attacks. Eleanor Kane had once been an actress too. In 1946, she had auditioned for a small independent film and felt, for the first time, that she had found her purpose. She had talent. She had discipline. She had drive. But when the producers brought in a new girl, Norma Jean Baker, everything changed. Eleanor watched as the room turned to light. She watched men who barely noticed her suddenly trip over themselves to offer Norma Jean coffee, chairs, compliments, opportunities. She watched the world receive Norma Jean like a sunrise. Eleanor didn't get the part. Norma Jean did. And something inside Eleanor cracked. She spent years trying to convince herself it wasn't jealousy. She told herself she was a serious woman, a thinking woman, a critic, a writer. But each time Marilyn Monroe appeared on a magazine cover, Eleanor felt a tightening in her chest. A reminder of the life she believed Marilyn had stolen from her. A reminder of everything she wasn't. Over time, that bitterness became ink. And that ink became her career. By 1962, Eleanor was no longer attacking Marilyn out of anger. She was attacking her out of habit, out of muscle memory, out of a twisted sense of identity built on tearing down the woman she believed had once taken her dream away. But no one knew that months earlier, Eleanor's world had begun to collapse. Her husband of 23 years had passed away from a sudden heart attack. Her column was losing readership. She was drinking more, sleeping less, and waking every morning with a sense of meaninglessness she couldn't explain. And on the night of August 4th, she sat alone at her kitchen table, a glass of gin trembling in her hand, trying desperately to quiet the voice inside her that whispered that she had wasted her life hating someone she had never actually known. It was in that moment that her phone rang. The sound startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the receiver. Hello. There was a pause. A long, delicate breath on the other end of the line. Then, Eleanor, it's Marilyn. The glass slipped from Eleanor's hand and shattered on the floor. She gripped the phone tighter, convinced she had misheard, convinced this was some cruel prank. But then she heard it again, soft, breathy, unmistakable. I hope I didn't call it a bad time. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came out. For years she had imagined what she would say if she ever met Marilyn face to face again. Something biting, something clever, something that proved she wasn't intimidated. But now, hearing that gentle voice on the phone, all of those imagined lines evaporated. How did you get this number? She finally whispered. Marilyn gave a small laugh, one Eleanor had mocked dozens of times in print. I've had it for a while. I just never had the courage to use it. Courage. The word hit Eleanor harder than she expected. Marilyn Monroe, the woman Eleanor had painted as vain and shallow, speaking about courage and calling her, the woman who had spent a decade destroying her. What do you want, Marilyn? Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. Another pause. A trembling inhale. I want to say I'm sorry. Eleanor felt the room tilt. You're sorry? For what? For existing in a way that made you feel small. The words were so unexpected, so raw, that Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest. She couldn't understand how Marilyn could know the truth she had buried from everyone, including herself. Marilyn continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I used to read your columns, you know. Not because I wanted to. Because the studios made me. They said it was important to know what people were saying. Sometimes your words hurt so much I couldn't breathe. Sometimes I cried in my dressing room before scenes. But I never hated you, Eleanor. I just wished I understood why you hated me. Eleanor shut her eyes. Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. I didn't hate you, she choked. I hated what you represented. I know, Marilyn said softly. And I'm sorry for that too. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then Marilyn asked the question that would haunt Eleanor for the rest of her life. Were you ever happy, Eleanor? The older woman felt her throat close. She sunk into a chair, shaking. No one had ever asked her that. Not her husband, not her readers, not her friends. Certainly not the woman she had spent her life tearing down. I don't know, Eleanor whispered. Marilyn's voice softened even further. I always thought the people who hated me the most were the ones who needed something I didn't know how to give. Eleanor pressed the phone harder to her ear, desperate to hold on to the moment. Marilyn, why are you calling me? There was a quiet exhale on the other end. Because tonight, I realized I don't want to leave this world with anyone thinking I didn't care. Especially someone who once wanted the same dream I did. Eleanor froze. Leave this world. Marilyn didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, fragile, distant, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. I'm tired, Eleanor. So tired. And I didn't want my last words to be to doctors or agents or strangers. I wanted them to be to someone who saw me long before the world did. A cold wave ran through Eleanor's entire body. Marilyn, what are you saying? Where are you? Are you alone? You need help. Marilyn cut her off gently. I'm not alone. You're here with me, aren't you? Eleanor felt something break inside her. Marilyn continued, voice trembling now. I just wanted someone to know that I tried. I really tried. To be good. To be enough. To be real. Even when the world only wanted the fantasy. The line crackled softly. Eleanor, do you think anyone will remember the real me? Eleanor opened her mouth to answer, and the call went silent. Eleanor stared at the receiver, her pulse pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Marilyn, she whispered. Marilyn, are you there? Nothing. A dead, hollow silence. She pressed the phone to her cheek, praying she would hear breathing, rustling, anything. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a faint click, as if Marilyn had shifted her hand on the phone. I'm sorry, Marilyn whispered. I didn't mean to disappear. I just didn't know how to answer your question. Eleanor swallowed hard. Her throat felt like it was closing. Marilyn, listen to me. People know the real you. People love you. Marilyn gave a tiny, heartbreaking laugh. They love her, she said, her voice drifting. The girl on the screen. The dream they made. But Norma. No one ever really knew her. Norma. It was the first time in the entire conversation that she had referred to herself by her birth name. It struck Eleanor with such force that she had to grab the edge of her table to steady herself. Marilyn, she said softly, I knew you before you were a dream. I saw you when you still walked like a girl trying to decide whether she had permission to shine. I didn't hate you. I envied your courage. Marilyn's breath caught. Courage. Yes, Eleanor said. You walked into rooms that were built to swallow women whole. You pretended to belong until you did. You survived things most women never could. You don't need to apologize for that. For a moment, Marilyn didn't speak. When she did, her voice sounded smaller, almost childlike. I didn't want to be a burden, she murmured. Not to the studios. Not to the audience. Not to the people I loved. You were never a burden, Eleanor said quickly, her voice cracking despite her efforts. You were a mirror, a beautiful, painful mirror that showed us the things we couldn't face in ourselves. Another silence. Then Marilyn whispered, Eleanor, you wrote once that my tragedy was that I didn't know who I was. Do you remember? The columnist felt her stomach twist. She had written that. She had been proud of that line. It had made headlines for weeks. Yes, Eleanor said quietly. I remember. I think you were right, Marilyn said. I never knew how to stop being the girl the world needed. Even when it hurt. Even when I wanted to run. Her voice trembled, as if she were fighting tears. But tonight, for the first time, I think I know who I am. And I'm not sure she deserves to stay. No, Eleanor gasped. Marilyn, stop. Please stop talking like that. You're tired. You're overwhelmed. You need someone there with you. Give me your address. I'll come right now. Marilyn's breath shook. I don't want you to see me like this. You don't get to decide that. Eleanor snapped, her voice breaking. Not tonight. Not after every word I wrote about you. I owe you more than this phone call. I owe you the truth. And the truth is, I was wrong about you. I was wrong for years. Marilyn didn't respond. I should have defended you, Eleanor said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I should have used my voice to help you, not hurt you. But I was angry at the world, and you were the easiest place to aim my rage. I punished you for being loved. I punished you for being everything I thought I wanted to be. And you never fought back. A long moment passed. Then, softly, I never wanted to fight you, Eleanor. Eleanor let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a breath. Please, she whispered. Let me come to you. But Marilyn only sighed. It was a soft, fragile sound, like someone laying down a heavy burden they'd carried too long. I called you, Marilyn said, because I didn't want to disappear without someone knowing that I forgave you, that I understood you, that none of the things you wrote ever made me hate you. Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the sob that tore through her. Marilyn, she begged, you can't talk like this. You can't say goodbye. People love you. The world loves you. I don't want the world, Marilyn whispered. I just wanted someone to see me. Really see me. Just once. I see you, Eleanor said desperately. Right now? I see you. And I need you to stay. Another pause. Not empty. Waited. You know, Marilyn said. When I was a child, I used to pray that someone would hear me if I cried. Just one person. I didn't care who. I just didn't want to be alone with the hurt. Her voice cracked. And tonight, you answered. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. Marilyn, where are you? Are you in danger? Did you take anything? But Marilyn did not answer those questions. Instead, she said something Eleanor would never forget. Do you think, Marilyn whispered, that if I had been born plain, or awkward, or unremarkable, anyone would have cared enough to hurt me? Eleanor closed her eyes, tears streaming freely now. Yes, she said. Someone would have loved you. Because you're worth loving, Marilyn. You always were. There was a faint, trembling exhale on the line. I wish I believed that, Marilyn murmured. I really do. The room around Eleanor felt suddenly too small, too quiet. She pressed the phone harder to her ear. Marilyn, you don't have to believe it alone. Let me come to you. I won't write about it. I won't tell anyone. Just let me help you. Please. A soft rustling sound traveled over the line. Fabric, maybe, or the shifting of someone sitting on the edge of a bed. Then Marilyn said something so gentle, so unbearably kind, that Eleanor's heart broke. You already did, she whispered. You listened. Eleanor's breath caught. Marilyn. But Marilyn interrupted, her voice now distant, fading like a candle flickering in its final moments. Promise me something? Anything, Eleanor said instantly. If anyone ever asks who I really was, a pause, shaky and fragile. Tell them I tried. Tell them I wasn't just the dream. Tell them I mattered. You did, Eleanor whispered fiercely. You still do. Another long silence followed. This one felt different, emptier, colder, like the sound of a door closing somewhere far away. Then Marilyn spoke for the last time. Good night, Eleanor. The line clicked. Eleanor froze. She didn't breathe. She didn't speak. She simply sat there, the receiver pressed to her ear, listening to the hum of the dead line, as if it might suddenly bring Marilyn back. But it didn't. And deep down, Eleanor knew it wouldn't. For a moment that felt like hours, Eleanor remained frozen in her chair, staring at nothing. The shattered glass lay at her feet, the gin soaking slowly into the cracks of her old linoleum floor, but she couldn't move, not even to breathe properly. Her mind replayed Marilyn's final words over and over, each repetition tightening around her chest like a closing fist. "Good night, Eleanor." The simplicity of it made everything worse. At first, Eleanor tried calling back. Once, twice, 10 times. Each time the phone rang endlessly, echoing in her ear like a cruel reminder that she was already too late. She considered running to her car, driving to Brentwood, pounding on Marilyn's door until someone answered. But fear held her in place. The fear of what she might find, of what she already suspected she would find. By the time her hands stopped shaking enough to dial the operator, it had been nearly 20 minutes. She demanded, begged, for them to connect her to the Los Angeles Police Department, to anyone who could go to Marilyn's home immediately. The operator's tone shifted when she realized whom Eleanor was asking about. Something in her voice sobered. "Ma'am," the operator said quietly, "you're not the first to call tonight." Those words pierced Eleanor like an arrow. She didn't sleep. She sat by her phone with her arms wrapped around herself, rocking back and forth in her kitchen chair, as if she were trying to hold together a body that had already begun to crack from the inside. Every time the phone rang, or even sounded like it might ring, she jumped. At 3:17 a.m., it finally did. Her trembling fingers fumbled the receiver. "Hello? Hello, is she all right? Please tell me she's all right." There was a long pause on the other end. A man cleared his throat. "Ma'am, is this Miss Eleanor Kane?" Her heart dropped. "Yes. This is Sergeant Howard of the LAPD. I'm calling regarding Marilyn Monroe." Eleanor stopped breathing. "I'm very sorry," the sergeant said. "She's gone." The words didn't land at first. They floated in the air like dust motes illuminated by a beam of light. Visible, undeniable, but too surreal to grasp. "Gone," Eleanor whispered. "Gone where?" The officer hesitated. "She was found unresponsive in her bedroom." "I'm sorry, ma'am. She passed earlier this evening." Something inside Eleanor ruptured. Her knees buckled, and she sank slowly to the kitchen floor, clutching the phone as if it were a lifeline tied to the only person who had ever truly understood her bitterness, her envy, her grief. The sergeant asked if she needed medical help, but she couldn't form words. She hung up without realizing she had done it. And then she cried. She cried like she hadn't cried since her mother's death. Raw, broken, animalistic. Guilt poured out of her in waves. For the articles. For the sarcasm. For the cruelty she had disguised as wit. For the years she had built her identity on resenting a woman who had been fighting invisible battles while the world demanded she sparkle for them. At some point, she crawled into her bedroom and collapsed on the floor beside her nightstand. Hours passed. Dawn crept slowly across her window, brushing pale blue light across her face. She had no tears left, only silence. A silence that felt too heavy for one body to carry. But then she remembered something that jolted her upright. The call. Their conversation had been recorded. Decades before smartphones, many journalists still used small reel-to-reel devices attached to their home phones. Eleanor had installed hers back in the early 1950s to avoid misquoting interview subjects. She had forgotten it was still connected. Her breath caught as she stumbled to her living room shelf. She moved aside books, dusted stacks of old tapes, rummaged frantically until her fingers closed around a small metal reel labeled only with the date. August 4th, 1962. Her hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. She threaded it into the recorder, pressed play, and Marilyn's voice filled the room. Fragile, trembling, honest in a way the world had never heard. Eleanor sank to the floor, one hand over her mouth, as Marilyn spoke the words she knew had been meant for her alone. Words that were not gossip, not scandal, not seduction. Words that revealed the soul of a woman the world had spent her entire career misrepresenting. She listened to the call again and again until daylight overtook the whole room. Not because she wanted to, but because she felt she owed Marilyn that much. To hear her, really hear her, the way she hadn't when it might have mattered. The next week, Eleanor wrote the most important article of her life. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't clever. It wasn't a column dripping with cynicism and witty barbs. It was a confession. She titled it, "The Night Marilyn Monroe Told Me the Truth." The article opened with a single line. "If I could give back every word I ever wrote about her, I would." She wrote about the call in careful detail, never revealing the most intimate parts, the pieces Marilyn had spoken as if she were speaking to a mirror. She wrote about guilt, envy, and the way a person can mistake another woman's light for an attack on her own worth. She wrote about Norma Jean, the girl behind the dream, and how the world had failed to separate the two. And she wrote the sentence that would define the piece, printed in bold across newspapers nationwide. Marilyn Monroe did not die because she was weak. She died because she was human in a world that wanted her to be perfect. The column spread across the country within days. Letters poured in, thousands of them, many from women who confessed they had judged Marilyn harshly or envied her without understanding the cost of beauty, fame, and loneliness. Former co-stars reached out privately to Eleanor with their own regrets, their own memories of Marilyn crying quietly between takes or trying desperately to please everyone in a world determined to misunderstand her. Something shifted. Slowly, painfully, Marilyn Monroe began to be remembered not as a joke or a cautionary tale, but as a woman who had carried unimaginable burdens behind a smile the world adored. A woman who had read poetry late into the night, who had studied acting like it was scripture, who had fought to be taken seriously in an industry that refused to see her humanity. Years later, Eleanor would keep the tape of that final call in a locked drawer beside her bed. She would listen to it on nights when she felt lost or unworthy or haunted by the choices she had made. It grounded her. It reminded her that even the brightest stars flicker with doubt, that even the most envied woman in the world could feel worthless. It reminded her of the question Marilyn had asked in a trembling voice. Do you think anyone will remember the real me? Eleanor spent the rest of her life trying to answer that question. She became an advocate for mental health in the entertainment industry, writing extensively about the pressures placed on actresses to be flawless, silent, and eternally smiling. She established a scholarship in Marilyn's name for young women entering the dramatic arts, especially those who came from foster homes or struggled with self-esteem. And every year, on August 4th, she wrote a private letter addressed simply to Norma Jean. She never mailed them. She simply kept them folded in a box, each one beginning with the same words. I remember you. When Eleanor died in 1989, the tape of Marilyn's final call was found in her nightstand, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Beside it were the letters, the articles, and a worn photograph of Marilyn from 1953, creased at the edges, soft from being held too many times. The executor of her estate found a note in Eleanor's handwriting taped to the inside of the box. It said, "Her story saved me from myself. Please treat it gently." And to this day, historians who have examined the recording say that Marilyn's last words, spoken not to a lover or a studio executive, but to the woman who once hated her, are among the most revealing she ever shared. Not because they solved the mystery of her final night, but because they revealed the truth of her life. That she tried, that she mattered, that behind the legend was a human being longing to be seen. And perhaps, more than anything, because in that final fragile moment, Marilyn Monroe chose not bitterness or rage or isolation, but forgiveness. A forgiveness that transformed her last conversation into her most profound legacy. A legacy that whispers to anyone who has ever felt unseen. Someone will remember the real you.